call to the most honourable member for Monash.
Thank you. I don't know whether the member for Dunkley wishes to have a little bit more time to speak. That would be up to her, but I'm quite happy to move in that direction.
Thank you very much. That is a very generous offer. I think I've said enough, but I appreciate that, member for Monash. Thank you.
Let me say to the member for Dunkley, through you, of course, Mr Chair, Deputy Speaker, that was an excellent contribution from the member for Dunkley. It was considered. She canvassed many of the issues that are before the nation as a whole and have been for a long time. I'd like to identify myself with nearly all of the remarks that she made while I've been in the House listening to her. And she obviously has a very clear understanding of the broader issues that we face as a nation, trying to get some equality in that cohort of people, of women. And we shouldn't forget the other stresses that are on women that are not on men, very clearly. And I think that was just an excellent contribution to the debate. And if anybody heard the member for Dunkley, they'd actually be listening to someone who has canvassed the issues and putting the issue out there for your consideration, for those of you who are listening to this address today, for your consideration. She didn't direct the traffic. She just said, here are the issues. These are the issues we need to resolve. And she puts to the parliament that supporting this legislation will go toward that. Nobody said it'll fix it, but it will go towards that. And there was a point that the member for Dunkley said at the back end of her address, and that's when she talked about women making choices that men do not have to make, especially in regard to motherhood and the decisions that they take. Of course, before I go into that, what they call in my notes in front of me parenthood penalty, and where that takes us, I'd like to go there in a minute. But I want to say to you, Deputy Speaker, that when the member for Dunkley mentioned that, it was very clear to me that women sacrifice to make the decisions to have children. Because on some of the figures that I looked at, those women who choose otherwise, and they have absolute right to do that, to choose otherwise. And I'm on about people making choices about their own lives and how they lead them until they can be interrupted by life's journey. But especially, I read that women that enter the workforce and don't have the interruption of those choices actually do equally as well in many areas as men as they progress through. There's no doubt about that. Because in this nation, quite rightly, when the member for Dunkley said, look, what are you talking about? I've got women in my business and they get the same pay as a man at the same level, depending on how they negotiate. I think some women don't negotiate hard enough and haven't been trained to negotiate hard enough, and sort of put themselves down, which there needs to be that area of interaction expertise. But more importantly, all the way through the system, where women are equal with men in those businesses. But the member for Dunkley then made another point, and the point was a lot of the women that we are talking about are not in those executive areas and climbing the executive ladder like every other person. Most women that we're talking about here today are in the carers' jobs. Those carers' jobs that are so important to our community. And the member for Dunkley again, and I was very interested in the address because she said, things that we used to do at home we no longer do. We used to care for our elderly at home, we no longer do. Our young children at home, we no longer do. Our very young children, yes, but even there they're going into childcare. And then there's the care of the disabled, who in my community, sadly, 50 years ago, were hidden in their homes. We didn't even know they were there. They're on the farms, they're in the houses. We didn't even know they were there until we opened our own centre that I was head of eventually and they came out of the woodwork. So the caring responsibilities has changed in a society that has changed dramatically, and government has a very large role in that now, through childcare, through disability care, through the support we give to people with disabilities, and those we give in other areas. One of the cohorts that I am concerned about, and I just want to go back. No, I'll go to this now. Deputy Speaker, the largest cohort in our community of people becoming homeless is women over 50. Women over 50. That's the growth area of homelessness. That's not even counting those women who are couch surfing, staying with a friend for a while, moving interstate just for a bit of a rest, which is hidden homelessness. So we as a nation and as a parliament, and every address that I've given over the last few months, I've talked about the buck stops here in the parliament. Nobody else. It stops with us. We are responsible for the outcomes that happen in and throughout our communities, and we have a responsibility to address those issues. And if they're staring you in the face, like unequal pay, we need to find ways to address them as a people. And as a parliament, we are only representatives of our people, and I know my community doesn't want to live with the fact that there are those women who are finding themselves homeless through no fault of their own. In fact, I spoke to a woman recently at actually a committee hearing, and actually when parliamentarians excuse me, do committee hearings, often other things come out of that committee hearing, that interaction with the community, than you would normally expect. And this woman said to the committee, and she was speaking to me directly, she said, Russell, I was one of you not long ago. I was one of you. I was in a good relationship. I was in a beautiful home. Everything was good. And then I had a health issue. Then I had a relationship issue. And I found myself without a home. It couldn't be me because I was the one supporting the homeless only just a while ago. Things can turn around, thank you. Things can turn around extremely quickly in life. So I want to talk about now the actual issue that we are faced with tonight, it's this evening in the Parliament. And I want to talk about especially the parenthood penalty. Comes from three margins: employment hours of work, and the hourly wage rate. Men and women's earnings follow similar paths. This is what the report said. Follow similar paths until parenthood. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I'll be right. Until parenthood, at which point their earnings begin to diverge. The arrival of children reduces women's earnings, now listen to this, by an average of 55% across the 5 years of parenthood. Men's earnings are unaffected by entry into parenthood. Moreover, the motherhood penalty remains persistent for at least a decade into parenthood, though there is slight recovery in the latter years. It's not just from the first child, but it's other children. What do we want in this nation? We do want people to have children. We do want women to have children. We do want this place to grow and thrive and have a high birth rate, or a higher birth rate than we've got at the moment. So I'd put to you that where we need to address the issue is for those women that have made the choice to have a family. Now, I know men have a greater involvement in the upbringing of the child compared to the era that I came through with my children. But really importantly, we've been struggling since the Hawke years. I was here, came here in 1990, and Brian Howe in the Hawke government was then the minister. And he had what was called a family action plan, meant to address these issues. The Howard government. John Howard had a family action plan of sorts, the same, and that's where he got tax benefit Part A and Part B. So he tried to put money into households with children, to set them apart and increase the well-being of that household. They were comparably, not the Hawke government, but the Howard government, Howard Costello governments, were one of the wealthiest governments in this nation's history since Federation. They actually had the money and they were able to spend it on programs like that to make a difference to women and families in this country, and they did. And they were good times for families. And they were good times for the budget of this nation, not by our own doing, but by the fortuitous place that Australia was in with its economy, and the reforms that had been made by the ensuing the governments of Hawke, Keating, and then the Howard government. Their reforms also put Australia in a very good position to do well, and they were able to funnel that money into families. We're way far from that these days. So we need to be addressing in some way, and everybody's tried to do it. Income splitting was not one idea that always gets rejected. It's too dear. Directing money, giving mums work as soon as their youngest child turns 8. I think I was on a committee that recommended that it should be 12 years of age before they have to cease the parenting payment and go on to the unemployment benefit, which is a great loss to women in this country. Should never have happened. But allow them to go into work. One of the things that comes to me all the time, though, is that why is policy around women always about getting women into work and not about enabling them in any way they choose to look after their children? For those who choose and want to stay home and look after their children. They want to be there for their kids as they grow, from the very young to the juvenile to the older person. They want to stay home. But to do that, they have to have some wealth. There has to be enough to pay the mortgage, to pay the car, pay the fuel, especially if you live in a regional area. It's more difficult. So the direction has to be, we've got to have 2 incomes. Well, why can't governments have a focus on looking after women who actually want to look after their children as well, not just about force women to go back into the workforce? Now, for some, under the Parents Next program, which I've just learned all about, which I knew nothing about in this country, so I went on the committee, and a former committee that I was on and had some very good support staff in that committee that made some very, very good recommendations about where the nation need to be headed in regard to a certain cohort, especially women. Some men, but especially women. And I expect that those things need to be taken up in this time of more compassion and concern, because we not only have a responsibility to the women who have missed out over this time, we have a responsibility to their children, because they're the next generation. And I don't want to be part of governments and oppositions that don't have the focus of our responsibility on their children as well. I think we do have a responsibility. It takes a country to look after its children. We're wealthy enough to look after our children through their parents. And we're also wealthy enough to recognise that women play a greater role in the caring and upbringing of their children than most men. It's a fact. Don't walk away from it. They do a better job too. And all the men I've just offended out there, come and talk to me. But in actual fact, their caring ability is something that's remarkable. And I think that we need to find innovative ways to give women a greater choice about what they want to do, and find ways to increase the benefit to them in a way that's not offensive to anybody else, but recognises their special status in Australia. And I've had to say that a few times lately, recognising women's special status in organisations, political parties, and other areas of life. Let's not ever lose that fact.
I thank the honourable member for Monash for his contribution.